Greetings, everybody, and welcome to my YouTube channel, all that is. I'm so glad to have you here today with us. Today, I have a very special guest. Her name is Paula. So, welcome, Paula, to the show.
Hi, thank you so much.
Well,
I'm
Paula
so happy
came
to
to
be here.
me, yeah, so I'm so glad to have you. Paula came to me very authentically, shall we say. She nudged me on Instagram and she told me that she had actually seen one of my podcasts or my blogs, and this one was titled, I guess, The Shocking Truth Behind Forced Breeder Programs. And she said that my blog had made an impact on her life. So I wrote back and I said, I'd love to hear your story. And so she emailed me and she said, she just gave me an outline of her story. And I was just so moved by her story. And so I would love to, dig into this and just get to know Paula a little bit and allow for her to tell us this beautiful love story of hers. But before we get into it, I just wanted to read, if you don't mind, Paula, I just pulled a line from your email, and it reads, "This is a love story, but it is not your typical love story, because in this love story, the main character must first find love within before she can find it without." I thought that was really poignant and it sort of encapsulates everything that you told me on your email just surrounding this beautiful, beautiful story. So, welcome to the show, and I'd love to hear about this love story in your own words. And if you want to give us a little bit of your background, if you will, and let us know a little bit about you before you dive into the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you started with that line because I feel like when I was trying to think about how to start, that was exactly the phrase that came up to me. So thank you for that beautiful introduction. Um, yeah, so I'm Paola Chapa. I am Mexican. I grew up in the United States in Massachusetts, but ever since the pandemic, I've been kind of like traveling the world, traveling around, but really seeing Mexico as my home base again and really reconnecting with my roots, my motherland. Um, yeah, so right now I live on Mayan land in Chiapas. It's a beautiful, wild country, and I'm getting to reconnect with a lot of ancestral wisdom, a lot of wisdom from the land while I'm here. Um, yeah, and I think that really this space that I've cultivated for myself, this new home that I've built for myself, is what has allowed me to begin to connect to this deeper story that really spans lifetimes, I feel. Um, I would say the story kind of, I guess, begins lifetimes ago, but really my first memories are when I was like 7 years old. I remember having this dream, and it feels almost like an alien love bite in a way where like I was 7 years old and I was like um lined up with like all of these other children around my age, and they were all kind of like lined up before me. And I don't know what happened during that dream, but it feels almost like there was some sort of interference where maybe our souls got entangled, or maybe there was some sort of interference. But yeah, it feels like, I mean, I had this dream when I was 7 years old, and it's like stayed with me my whole life. And there was one phrase or one line from that dream that I remembered like very vividly, and it almost became like a mantra when I was younger. And it was like, and then he kissed me. And I was like, and then he kissed me, and what? Like, I was expecting somebody like to meet somebody in my adult life who would kiss me, and then like my whole life would transform. And so that's something that I kind of like when I went into adulthood, I was kind of seeking that. Um, And I got married. I built a whole life for myself. I lived in Boston. I went to Boston University. I became a psychotherapist and I had this whole life that I built for myself there. I was working in a hospital and all of a sudden this whole life just kind of like it was almost like the spell of like this normal life dissolved and it was all in within 1 month where I was like um, it was 2021, like April 2021. And within a month, I had ended my marriage. I had left that job at the hospital and I had decided that I didn't want to live in Boston anymore. And it all worked out really seamlessly where like I was offered a paid leave of absence from work. For 6 months, I was going to continue getting paid and I could do whatever I wanted in life. Um, and I was no longer married. And so I was thinking, like, what is the one thing that I've always wanted to do in my life? And when I was probably 16, when I was in high school, I learned about this thing, this pilgrimage called El Camino de Santiago, and it's in Spain. And basically, you walk from France to the easternmost tip of Spain, which at one point, like, was the edge of the world. And whenever I learned about it in school, I was like, that sounds like a great way to get to know Spain. A lot of my ancestors, my grandmother was from Spain, and so I feel really connected to that land too. And yeah, I've always wanted to kind of like really slowly get to know that place. And so as soon as I was given this green light, as soon as I was given, unlimited resources essentially and like unlimited time, that was the first thing that I decided to do. And that was just a beautiful summer of like healing and transformation. Um, and just like learning about a new way of living.
So this was in 2021?
This was in 2021, yeah.
Okay.
And then my father got sick. My father lived in Mexico City, so I was called to return back to Mexico, return back to my homeland where I was born. Um, and once I was back in Mexico City, I was feeling really like uncomfortable being back here because I hadn't lived here since I was 10, since 1998. And I was angry to have to be here. I was you know, heartbroken over my father being so sick and having been sick for most of my life. He got sick when I was 3 years old, with a brain tumor. So really, like, it's been a whole lifetime of him being sick. And I was lonely too. And always this in the back of my mind playing, right? Like the whole, and then he kissed me, the whole like wanting to meet this like love of my life, wanting to meet this person for myself. And so
I'm
this was
guessing
a
that
time
didn't
where
happen with your marriage.
no,
Okay, we can
my
come back to
marriage was
that.
very practical.
Okay, we can come back to that. But I just wanted to put that in there. So because you kept saying that phrase kept coming back to you. So that didn't
Yeah.
come from your marriage. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. And so, like I said, I was bored. I was having to go to the hospital to visit my father every day. The hospital system in Mexico is so different from the US, where like they don't have nurses, they don't have people taking care of your loved ones. And so you either have to pay for somebody or you have to show up. And really, like we did both. We hired somebody like a nurse to come and see my father every day. And also, we wanted to show up and be there every day just to make sure that his treatment was being followed. But whenever I wasn't there, I didn't know anybody in Mexico City, and I was here for like months. I am incredibly lucky that by that point I had been offered an online job as a therapist, and so I could work remotely from anywhere in the world. But when I wasn't working, when I wasn't seeing my father, I was just really lonely and really bored. So I started going on dating apps, like there must be someone for me. And this was in 2022. And really was like the last day I was in the last week I was in Mexico City. I was scrolling through different profiles on an online dating app and I came across this face. And as soon as I saw this face, I was like, this is it. This is him. Like, this is a person that I've been looking for. There was something in my soul that recognized him and like really it's just like a picture of his face, but I was like, this is him. And so then I matched with him and I was like, I had been like looking at so many different people, but like really none of them. And there's so many people in Mexico City. It's one of the biggest cities in the world, and none of them had caught my eye before this man. And so I matched with him and I was like, I really hope internally, I was like, I really hope he matches back with me. And he did, but this was again a week before I left Mexico City. And so we talked for that week. We got to know each other a little bit, but he was flying to Madrid and I was flying to Barcelona. So we were flying back to the same country, but we were kind of being separated by many kilometers. Um, and I was in Spain again for 5 months, but this whole time we were like, still talking, but separated by distance. We got to know each other through that year. And at some point, my father passed away. And so, um, there was a lot of grief and a lot of me wanting to isolate, a lot of me wanting to go inwards. And so he was still kind of trying to connect with me. But at this point, I was just like completely shut down to wanting to be with anybody, wanting to connect with anybody. Um, So I essentially, like, after a lot of rejection, he kind of got the message and he was like, fine, I won't bother you. And we stopped talking to each other. And then I was called back to Mexico City for the holidays. And while I was there, I started feeling again kind of this remembrance of him and thinking like I was opening myself up again. It was the holidays, I was spending time with family, and I was just kind of like in a space where I wanted to begin to reconnect with others. And I thought of him. I really hadn't talked to him since spring of the year before, but for some reason I decided to reach out to him. And I kind of apologized for having rejected him. I explained that my father had passed away and that I wasn't really in a good space then, but that I was back in Mexico City and he lives in Mexico City. And so we decided to meet up. And this was a year after we had kind of initially connected. And so we met up. And for a lot of reasons, like it felt really complicated to be with him. I felt like we would meet up once a month, which for me wasn't enough. And it would be these beautiful and intense meetings where we would just talk for a few hours and connect. It was never really physical, but it was like this big soul remembrance, this deep connection that I felt with him. I felt like I could be myself in a way that I couldn't really be myself with really anyone else. Um,
Did he
and I feel
feel the
like this,
same towards you?
um, I'm not really sure because he's not very emotionally vulnerable. I do think that like he does not have a lot of friendships. His life is also very, or at that point, I feel like at that point we were like in similar levels where he was also very isolated. He didn't have a lot of friendships. And so I feel like I was one of his only friends. I was one of the few people that he was meeting with and connecting with. And he shared some things about himself with me. He shared that he was like a songwriter and a journalist and that he wrote science fiction. But whenever I would push him to like share these things with me, he would kind of like shut down and close off and not want to share more. Um, and so it was I would say like 4 months of this where we would meet up and have this very intense connection, but then we would only meet once a month, and it was like 4 months of this. Um, and for me, it was very hard because I wanted more. And through this, I was kind of like becoming more spiritual, becoming more spiritually connected. And so I would ask questions and I would receive answers like, oh, he's definitely the guy for you. Um, this story that you have, it's bigger than the two of you. Um, you're meant to write a story together. And so I took all of these messages that I was receiving as like, he's the one for me. And this is kind of my life purpose. But it was this very distorted and warped idea of like, being with him is my life purpose, where like, I feel like that should never be anybody's purpose, right? Like somebody else shouldn't come over you. Um, but that's kind of how I interpreted it. And so whenever we would meet up and like nothing was happening, the relationship wasn't deepening in any way, I felt really frustrated and I felt like I wasn't fulfilling my mission, my purpose in this life. And it was devastating. Like I would feel so much grief, so much misery, so much emotional misery. So much sexual misery because again this wasn't really a physical connection, it was mostly just spiritual and emotional. um and it all of this was kind of like prompting me to keep busy, keep traveling, keep healing, keep doing things um for myself. And so that summer again I went abroad, I went back to Europe. And I feel like almost like distance is really good in this connection because whenever we have this distance, it's not like this premise of like he's there, but he's not able to see me, right? Like when we're separated physically, then it's easier to just kind of like talk and connect in that way. And so that created some relief. And during this time, I kind of started to work through some ideas of like, oh, this like crucifixion wound in a way where I felt like I'm Christian, I grew up Catholic, and so I learned that, Jesus died for our sins. Jesus was like the embodiment of true unconditional love, and we should all strive to be like Jesus. And so, if I wanted to embody this idea of true unconditional love, then I needed to suffer in love. So, that was my first realization that this wasn't really healthy, right? That like there was something in there that was kind of like a spell that was making me suffer in love. And I was able to kind of release this um layer of this connection. And um I also started to realize like I held so much love for him and I could feel this love in a way that I hadn't felt love before. And I started to play around with that. So I started saying like, well, if I love him so much, can I love myself that much? Can I love others that much? And so I started bringing this love that I felt for him into other connections in my life with my clients, with family members, with friends. And so it was really helpful to understand love through this lens. And so I feel like in a lot of different ways, it was very healing to be in this connection with him. Um, but at some point, it just didn't really feel sustainable. I felt always this like yearning within me, this like constant pull where like things would be starting to go well in my life. I would be living somewhere really beautiful, but I would feel this like inexplicable pull, this inexplicable like draw, like something was pulling me back to Mexico City, and it felt really physically uncomfortable. Like I couldn't stand to be away from him and I would feel called back to Mexico City. And so I did a lot of work around like cord cutting and not having these cords that kept like pulling me to him. And that cleared another layer. I had this really powerful healing ceremony with a friend where like I lit a candle beforehand. And by the end of the session, the flame in the candle has separated into two flames.
Wow.
And I just felt like, yeah, after that, I just felt like so much relief. And I was able to travel and kind of like begin to disconnect from him in this new way. That summer, I completely blocked him and I stopped talking to him. I went on a Vipassana retreat where I really just connected with myself for 10 days. And then I went on this beautiful grid work mission. Um, And I was away for a whole month in Europe. I went to the US to visit friends and family. And I was basically gone all summer. When I came back, I didn't really think about him that much anymore. I was back in Mexico, but I didn't feel that pull, right? Like it was just, it felt natural to come back. And all of this felt really good. And hmm, that's when I moved to Chiapas. That's when I moved to Mayan land, which is 14 hours by bus from Mexico City. So it's like really far away from Mexico City. I started living in community, which like this whole journey had really been about like solo traveling, getting to know myself, but now I was ready to live in community again. I was no longer really isolated. I developed like so many friendships and connections, and I wasn't really thinking about him until January. I feel like this is very cyclical too, where like whenever we reconnect, whenever we first met was in January, whenever we reconnected the second year was in January. And this time I went back to Mexico City in January again to visit my family. And while I was there, I started thinking about him, started missing him. And so I decided to unblock him. I didn't really reach out, but I just decided to unblock him and just leave it open. You know, if he wanted to reach out, he would. And I spent time with my friends and family. It was a really healing trip for me because before that, I had felt like so resistant to being in Mexico City. But this time, I just felt like I healed my relationship with my motherland. It just felt like I was opening myself up to connecting with all of these people and just feeling really grateful and happy to be seeing friends and family. And then I went back to Chiapas, and while I was back here, he actually did reach out to me. And that day that he reached out, we kind of reconnected, and it just felt like old times, right? This deep remembrance, this soul connection. Things really flowed smoothly with our conversation. But something had shifted. Like, I don't know if it was that I had kind of like stopped being in touch with him for so long. I don't know what it was, if it had been like so much internal healing. But he actually decided to share one of his stories that he had written. And like I said before this, he had been so emotionally closed off. He had never really shared any of his songs, any of his writings with me. But for whatever reason, he was now more open and he was willing to share this story with me. And the story was very dystopian. It was about um, these two men who were kind of like engineers in, I don't know if it was like a distant future where like humanity had kind of like fallen, or I don't know where or when it was set, but it was kind of these two men who were working in this like very isolated environment, and they were basically responsible for um eliminating souls or exterminating souls that would come into their field. There would be these strains or these ships that would come in, and then they would be in charge of like sending them off to be like obliterated or destroyed. Um, And so around this time, I also kind of started to connect with your work, and I read an initial story. It wasn't the one you mentioned, but it was another one. And it just felt similarly dystopian and similarly like destructive in a way. And so I shared it with him, and I was like, this made me think about that story that you wrote. Um, and this actually prompted even further exploration or even further kind of like intimacy, vulnerability from him, where he actually shared a song with me. Um, but the song was interesting because this song, when he, like, before he shared it with me, he prefaced this by saying, "This is a song that's for a female voice. This is meant to be sang by a female singer." It's something that I kind of channeled, I received, and I kind of just like wrote down and developed into a song, but it's really meant for a female voice. And it basically spoke about my experience. I felt in a way where it was about this woman who had met a man, and whenever they met, her soul was fragmented into a million boats, is what it's a very visually sensorial song. And it describes her soul being fragmented into like a million different boats. And she asks, like, how can I ever possibly retrieve all of these parts of my soul that have just been shattered across the universe? And then it talks about how she feels capable of creating new universes. She's this like all-powerful being and she's aware of this. But because of this experience, she's deciding to kind of like dim her light, dim her fire heart, is kind of what it said at the end. Um, and he shared this experience with me the day that I was going into an ayahuasca ceremony. And I felt like that story that I had read, one of your stories that I had read, and this song kind of were kind of like my blueprint, my map for the journey. And so the journey that I had when I was on ayahuasca was basically this soul retrieval. I I'm not a very visual person, but I went in and I knew that I had just retrieved this big part of my soul that I had taken it back from him. And it was kind of like my oversoul is a word that I heard in there. And it was this part of me that connected me to divinity. It connected me to my higher self. And it was just this knowing that that was back with me now. Um, and yeah, that was kind of the ceremony, and then just kind of a lot of reflection afterwards, because, it's a whole ayahuasca's a whole night thing. But the soul retrieval was very fast. I feel like it happened within an hour, 2 hours. And then after that, I was just kind of like I was a lot more lucid. I was just left alone with my thoughts, reflecting on a lot of different things. I went home, fell asleep, and when I woke up, I had this whole story that I had received where the soul fragmentation, he wasn't the one responsible for it, right? Like it was these other forces from another universe who had kind of, and what I heard was that this probably happened in ancient Lemuria or ancient Atlantis, where humans were just these beautiful divine creatures with all this life giving potential, this creational potential, and these forces came from another universe. They were kind of jealous about all of these powers that we had, and they wanted what we had. They wanted our creation potential, they wanted our wombs, and so they started kind of um fragmenting our souls as an experiment to see if they could harness that power, harness whatever we had. And so through, millions of years of degradation, they started kind of like force breeding us, to basically genetically modify us to install their DNA and mix it with ours. We lost that connection to source. We lost big parts of our soul. Um, and it was just this knowing that that was kind of like the work that I had done in that journey, was kind of retrieving that for myself. And yeah, now it's this idea of wanting to, I guess this whole journey left me feeling whole in a way that I hadn't felt before. Like before, I had always been like searching for something outside of myself, feeling like I was not complete. And I felt like it was because this man wasn't in my life. I felt like it was because I hadn't found love. I hadn't found this. And then he kissed me character. But I feel like after the ceremony, I just felt whole in a way that I hadn't felt before. I felt like a lot more connected to source, a lot more connected to my higher self. Um, and yeah, there was no more of that yearning, no more of this seeking outside of myself. Um, The week after the ceremony, I was coincidentally going back to Mexico City. And so this man and I did end up meeting while I was there. But again, I feel like before there had been a lot of this idea of sexual misery, this like attraction, but unfulfillment. And that wasn't there anymore. It felt almost like my purity, my innocence had also been restored. And it just felt fine to be friends and to be in the same space as him and to share a nice evening together. Um, and then go home and feel again complete, feel like I would be okay continuing to see him, but I would also be okay if we never saw each other again. And that was last week.
Oh, wow, that does bring it full circle, hey?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing, Paula. Thank you so much. That's such a beautiful story, and thank you for being so vulnerable in recounting that and sharing that with me. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I feel like in the same way that your story helped liberate me, I'm hoping that by sharing more of these stories, if I share my story, if other people start sharing their stories, we can continue to kind of help liberate each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, I truly feel that. And just from hearing how my story impacted you, it's almost like a domino effect, right? When people hear
Yes.
perhaps your story, then something will trigger in them. And, it's, and to me, it's like this template that's out there that people don't really recognize. Even yesterday, I had a healing session with one of my clients, and she too was a fractured soul and is struggling the same way that you and I are. But there's so many different aspects to this fracturing, if you will, and how we are trying to survive in this world with, unconsciously going through this revival, if you will, of trying to, first of all, survive in this environment and then be hit with all of this awakening energy, if you will, right? That's flooding our environment right now. So it tends to be very, very confusing on, whatever level of development you are, if you're coming in completely blind, or if you're coming in slightly awakened, or if you're coming in a completely awakened soul. There's so many different layers to this understanding of, first of all, where you fit as an individual, where you fit within society, where you fit within your inner circle or your family or your friends, and then being able to talk about these things. Like, for me, that's still the hardest obstacle, if you will. Like, my friends and my family, not a lot of them understand my path, and they like it just doesn't come up for conversation, right? And so this is my way of sharing my story, right, out there in on YouTube, or with people like you and others that have similar stories. And so I feel that this is the best way to get it out there, to first of all get it off your chest and speak about it, give that energy wings, if you will, and that there's a healing in that. And I see that has happened for you. So it warms my heart to see that transformation that happened within your life, and for you to be able to, you know, um, receive that gift into your life again, to be able to, first of all, have that pure connection to your higher self, to your oversoul, to the creator, because that's what I teach as well. I have a course to, connecting to your higher self, and that's now my mission, to spread the word and to give people a tangible way in how to first of all understand where it is we are in a galactic sense, how we got here. And those can be really, really hard stories to understand and to fathom, because if you put a picture of, say, perhaps a Draco in front of somebody, they'll think you're completely crazy. But that's what has happened to us. And it's been such an invasive, such a pervasive, um, hundreds of years and lifetimes, even for, for people like perhaps you and me, that we have gone through. And so, having come out perhaps on the other side and understanding the enormity of what has taken place is truly an accomplishment, right? And so when you speak about, feeling that sense of liberation, of not feeling that suppression, that feeling of yearning, after you've finally recovered that part of yourself and that fragmentation has been healed. It's truly amazing, and I've gone through that experience myself, and it hasn't been too long ago. Like, I'm going through this, like live on television almost. Like, every time something impactful happens in my life, I freely share it with, whoever wants to experience this with me and hear my story. So this is very, very new for me as well. And so again, I thank you so much for sharing your story. um there were so many things that came up as you were talking, and I just let you speak so that you could, there was a continuity to your story. But I just wanted to go back and just ask you about a few things. Do you have any siblings, Paula? Were you able to like connect with your family while you were going through this? Were you able to share that with your family, or were you all on your own in terms of your family dynamic?
I do have a brother and a sister, and we're
Oh,
very
okay.
close in age. My brother calls us Mexican triplets, like you know how there's Irish twins where they're born within a year
Yeah,
of each other,
yeah.
but we're three, so we're Mexican triplets.
Okay.
But they're not really spiritual, right? They're both still living in the US, have very professional lives. One of them is like in Silicon Valley, and the other one is in biopharmaceuticals. And so, really different paths that they've chosen in this life, or, at least for now. Um, my mother, though, my mother has always been kind of like in the New Age community. She does Reiki, she does like angel oracle readings. And so I went through a moment of separation with her too. I kind of had to kind of step away from her so I could fully discover who I am for myself. So while this whole journey was unraveling, I was kind of not really talking to her, and I was just kind of going through this on my own, but we recently reconnected, and I feel like she's somebody who is open to listening, is open to receiving all of this. So yeah, that is probably the most supportive person in my life right now, in within my family is my mother, because
That's
she is
awesome.
open to all of this.
That's awesome. So would you say she was sort of like the gateway to your spirituality, or was there something else? Like, was there a clear marker in your life that brought you into the spirituality that you experience now?
Maybe when I was growing up, I was still in like primary school, probably in like first grade, and she took me to this woman who did past life regressions. And so my first past life regression happened when I was around like 6, 7 years old, and I was in this beautiful jungle environment. I was a little girl, and or a little boy, I'm not sure, but I was just like this little wild thing, and I was running through the jungle. She also taught me about like auras and how people can read auras, and she bought me like this aura coloring book. So there was a lot of that in my childhood, I think. And this was when we lived in Mexico. I feel like in Mexico, people are a lot more open to spirituality and all of these things. Once I moved to the US, and especially Boston, especially Massachusetts, it's very academic, it's very rigid, very like scientific. And so I kind of shut all of that off for a while. And it wasn't until I actually left that environment again that I started reconnecting with this more spiritual side of myself, doing more ancestral work, connecting with my ancestors, doing a lot of healing in my feminine lineage. There was this moment where I set this intention where I wanted to heal all parts of my whole self, but thinking about this idea like you about all that is, right? And so when I said I wanted to heal all parts of my whole self, I was thinking really about all that is, right? Like beginning by healing myself, but then healing everything. And I set this as a prayer to my ancestors, and I feel like they were almost like if that's what you want, then we'll give it to you. And they started giving me all of these challenges and obstacles to learn from so I can really learn to heal myself and now begin to share this with others too.
Awesome. So are you a sensitive, Paula? Like, do you hear your ancestors? Do you feel them? Do you get visions? Like, how do you connect with them?
Um, yeah, I feel like with a lot of them, there's a specific animal that I associate with them. So whenever I see that animal, I know that they're kind of close by. I do receive some visions, but I think the biggest thing for me is just this knowing, like, all of a sudden, and this happens especially like right as I'm falling asleep or right when I'm waking up, I'll just receive like a lot of information, a lot of messages, or when I'm in ceremony too, you know. But I think that's the biggest way that I connect is just this sense of knowing and this just kind of like that story that I received that I shared. I just received these stories and I just know them.
That's awesome. Yeah, you are a terrific writer. And I've just written some notes here. I've written, um, I just wrote this I just picked this off of my email to you because at that point I was just so um enamored by your writing, right? So I said, here I am in tears, but happy tears. Your words are so beautiful as they fill me with so much love and profound gratitude. It takes me on a beautiful journey through your heart and the discoveries it has made along the way, lifetimes even, to find your true self and your true soul essence. There is a potent texture and a vibrancy to your words and your experience, so powerful and so beautiful. I truly felt this, when I had read your email, and this was like the second reading of your email, and it really, really, moved me so much, so deeply. And so, yeah, your story is just so beautiful, and just your writing is like I said, it's so vibrant. It just takes me there, into the experience. It's as if I'm experiencing
Hmm.
it with you. So this is the mark of a true writer. So, have you written anything? Have you published anything?
Yeah. Um, this is something else where I feel like whenever I was little, I was really connected to writing. I like me and a few friends of mine were like writers and we would write stories together. But this was when I lived in Mexico. And once I moved to the States, I kind of forgot all about that. But now that I've been kind of all of exploring myself, exploring how to express myself, I've started reconnecting with writing again. It started really just, and started journaling. Um, but yeah, it's evolved into right now, mainly what I do is I'll write things down, but then I will use them to create content for social media. But I think with everything that unfolded within this love story, I feel like it does need to be shared. So I think that's the next step is to really work on kind of organizing that story into different chapters where I'll speak about, my experience and all of the emotions that I had during that time. And then also like all the things that I learned and how I guided myself through healing that aspect. So I feel like, yeah, that's what's next is really writing a book around all of this love healing that I've been doing the past few years.
I would love to hear it. It's really a beautiful story, and I think, it's truly a seed that can be planted in many people's minds and for people to learn from it. So I would encourage you to pursue that really. It would be a beautiful, beautiful story, especially at this time in our lives, when, everybody's on that ascension path. There are so many that are confused, and I think it would definitely benefit humanity from hearing about your story. So go for it. I say go for it. It
Yeah,
sounds to
thank
me
you.
like Mexico is like an anchor for you at this point, um, spiritually and for your expansion. It seems like all of these energies seem to be birthing from Mexico for you, and there's so much expansion. happening for you from Mexico. It's like when you were telling me your story, it's like, you met this person in Mexico, you did your ayahuasca ceremony in Mexico, you connected with your ancestors in Mexico, you've, found community in Mexico. Um, and it's as if you are, like you said, returning to the earth, and there's so much to be learned from this experience and from just anchoring your energy in the land. Um, what are your future plans? Are you planning on sticking around there and making it your sort of your home base?
Yeah, and I don't know how much you know about astrocartography, but Mexico City for me is my Pluto, so it's really about like this death and rebirth process, right? About like soul healing, going deep within myself. And really that's what it is. Even before I was like spiritually connected, like there was one point where I was working in hotels and I got laid off and I went to Mexico City and I reinvented myself and went back to States and studied social work, became a therapist. But really it feels like anytime that I've transformed something, that something is ready to shed or something new is ready to be birthed, I go back to Mexico City. And then Chiapas, where I am now, like you said, is about, it's my Jupiter, right? So it's all about expansion. It's all about really cultivating everything that I learned and really expanding on it. Um, I am planning to be here for the next few years. I think I'm going to start co-living here in Chiapas and just really learn what that looks like and how to make sure that it's spiritual, but it's not kind of, toxic in any way. But really, I feel like whenever I think about myself, whenever I see myself like in my happiest um future timeline, it's really in Spain. And so I think that I'll be here for a few years and I don't know where life will take me, but I feel like where I'm meant to end up, where I will be fully realized, fully fulfilled is in Spain. But I'm trusting process, I'm trusting this journey, and I am perfectly happy and content with all of the different missions that I have here right now. And I am perfectly happy to be fulfilling them at this time.
That's awesome. Um, excuse me. You mentioned grid work. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that entail?
Yeah. I've heard it described, and this is like what resonates the most with me, where the earth the planet Earth itself is alive, right? And so, like us, like any living organism, it has veins, it has these currents where energy and life force flows through it. And um, for a lot of different reasons, a lot of these arteries might get clogged, like all of this energy might become stuck or stagnant. And humans are kind of like acupuncture needles for the earth. And so, whenever we go into especially energetic places and we sit and we meditate and we connect with the light of God, of Source, we are basically providing acupuncture for the earth. We're allowing some of that stagnant energy to be released. Um, and for me, it's this process of I travel a lot. I consider myself kind of nomadic in a way. And so whenever I enter these new places or these new lands, I kind of talk to the earth and I ask like, what stories are wanting to be shared with me? How can I be of service to the land? What are you calling for me to remember? And a lot of the times I will receive information. I will receive information about the land itself, about the ancestors who walked those lands, about, you know, creation stories from those lands. And all of that are things that I then write down and kind of try to share again through social media. I think other people call it psychic archaeology. That's another term that kind of resonates with me.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm not sure if you've heard of Indigo Angel. She goes as Indigo Angel 222 on
Yeah.
YouTube and I think all of her social media as well. I've just come I've just completed a gridwork course with her, and we did a huge a global gridwork mission last week. And so, yeah, for anybody interested, go check out her channel. She's really quite amazing. So, yeah, like I've learned, I was actually doing gridwork like organically on my own. But what Indy offered me was a kind of a methodical way in which to do it, with a more focused intention and a proper way of actually, anchoring your energy, going like remote viewing and doing it that way. But you and perhaps I too do it like while traveling through a place, and like you said, releasing that acupuncture point from the earth. My focus when I did it organically was more like focused to release the dark energies from those lands. And this was coming from the perspective of dismantling, if you will, the Draco energies from, all the places that I visited. So mine was
Mm.
more of, a more like releasing, if you will, of all of those constructs and all of the frequency fences that were built. And so, yeah, it's truly fascinating to look at this from all different perspectives and how we're all coming together and, whether individually or collectively healing the earth and trying to help her, if you will, move along with with her own ascension, because she too is ascending just like us, and so it's fantastic to hear all of these individual stories about, you connecting with the ancestral lands and hearing the stories and how things have come up, I guess, to this point of our own evolution. So thank you again for sharing your beautiful stories, Paula. Is there anything else you wish to share before we sign off here?
Just that I did do Indies grid work
Oh,
training,
did
not
you?
this year, but last year.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And I
Okay,
do
that's
feel
awesome.
like, yeah, I do feel like it kind of like brought forth a new level of understanding, a new way of connecting with the land, and to heal the lands that I, like you said, I was already doing beforehand, but really just like brought it into like a new level. So yeah, definitely check out Indy's work. I definitely
Yeah.
recommend it. And yeah, thank you for listening to my story.
Oh my
Thank
gosh,
you
it's been such a
for
pleasure. Actually, before we go, I have one little question which would probably help my viewers, and perhaps the people that want to take my course. I just wanted to ask about your higher self connection and I guess your connection now to your oversoul, that you have made that connection. Um, do you see like a before and after perhaps of when you were not that aligned, and then after this whole experience that you went through, like how has your connection, if you will, changed from then to now?
Mm. It was something that was very somatic. I could feel it. I could, like when people talk about scanning your body, and then if you're doing guided meditations, they say, like, okay, now connect to like the sky and the cosmos and the divine. Or like now go down and connect with the earth. It felt like I could feel my body, I could scan my body, but there was something blocking here and there was something blocking down below, right? Like I couldn't connect with the earth fully. I couldn't connect upwards either. It just felt like there was just like a fence, something blocking me in both of those channels. And now it does feel like that's been opened. And so I am able to kind of like leave my body and travel upwards or leave my body and travel downwards and kind of begin to explore those other realms.
That's awesome. That's exactly what I thought it would be, and that was my experience as well. And from, just interacting with my customers and my clients, they share with me these similar stories as well. And it kind of goes back to, and I'm guessing that you've done meditation before all of this happened as well, right?
Yeah.
And so for me as well, like I've been meditating for perhaps, I don't know, 20 odd years, but the breakthrough came when I made that connection to my higher self. So, in a way, I was still going through the motions of having that meditation experience, if you will, which was, filling my body with light, filling my energy with light. But it's as if that energy was generating just from my heart and filling my personal energy field, if you will, my aura. But it wasn't
Mhm.
extending into the higher realms or making that
Mhm.
connection to my higher self. So you've very clearly just demonstrated how that happened, and it was a similar experience for me as well. When you make that connection, when you have that breakthrough, it's like your heart energy is then aligning with those higher energies of your higher self, your oversoul, and eventually to the creator. And there's that dance, right, of the energy going up and down and up and down, and it's like a smooth flow, right, between your energy and the higher energies. So thank you for giving me that confirmation. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Hearing you describe it makes me like so giddy with excitement at continuing to explore this connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Paula. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I do hope we can keep in touch and, keep in touch in terms of just sharing our experiences going forward. And yeah, I'm truly grateful to you for being so vulnerable and sharing your story and your heart with us. And so to my viewers, I would highly recommend you connect with Paula and keep her close. I'll share her contacts and her social in the description below, and I will also share the videos that impacted her life and the blog that she read in terms of making this experience come alive for her. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Love, like, and share this video. Help me out with the channel. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Namaste. Thank you, Paula, again.
Thank you. It was such an honor to be here with you today.